it's going to, there we go. This is mainly so that volunteers who are remote or can't make it to today's meeting, since it is during a workday, can go back and watch this and still participate in the basics of evaluation. And yeah, this is primarily for our volunteers who are going to help this, but this is also, we invited staff because it has some good information about evaluation as a whole. You will hear some repeat information about the project and such, because I did not go over all the details with the volunteers. So those parts you can kind of just glaze over and I won't mind. But yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. If it'll go. I'm gonna do it. I believe in you. You can do it, computer. She's been rad today. So this is the agenda for today. We'll have an introduction to evaluating in museums. We'll talk about the evaluation project. We'll talk about how to randomize, which we'll go over what that means. We'll talk about the skills that our volunteers need to have, and we'll do a little bit of evaluation practice. Now, staff, you don't really have to stay for that, but it is always a good exercise if you want to stay and practice. There we go. So what is evaluation? Evaluation, by definition, is a term to describe the process of critically reviewing a process, program, exhibition, event, etc. Basically, anything can be evaluated. It's all up for grabs, but it's all about analyzing something with a greater eye. Often this is done outside a project team, so it can be objective, but in our case, we're doing it within the museum to try and make it a little more cost effective. The goal of evaluation is to understand and improve the subject being analyzed, as I said, from outside the project or project team. Sometimes that's not always possible though. So it's kind of like, for instance, the 3D Photoworks. I wasn't there when the first 3D Photoworks was created, so I'm kind of a bit of an outsider. We can also get outside opinions, that kind of stuff. So evaluation can look like a lot of things. I know when I was getting my master's, I took a heavy duty class on evaluation, and the person who was teaching it was a contract evaluator. They had a whole company that all they did was evaluate the Smithsonian's for the Smithsonian's as an outside experience. So very interesting. As many of you know, there are several methods for evaluation, so we're just going to touch on a few. There are the most common one that you guys think of, probably surveys. Those can go in several different forms, but a survey is a survey. You have focus groups. That's the one we're going to be using, or one of them. We'll go to more detail what those means. They can also be short interviews, time tracking, eye tracking, as well as a couple others. You can get very creative with your evaluation. Sometimes you combine a couple different methods. So if you're ever interested in doing something in evaluation, just look up a bunch of different methods. It's kind of a great rabbit hole to get down sometimes. And most importantly, the data collected is either quantitative or qualitative. These are big fancy evaluation words. So to break it down easily, quantitative, as you can see, quantity is numbered results. So that's usually how many of something. So that's like how many guests come into an event, how long do they spend somewhere, those kind of things. When there's a number attached to it, it's a quantitative result. Qualitative is more phrased results. So that's when someone's talking, that's a yes, no question, those kinds of things. You can't do, statistics and other things to those results the same way you can with quantitative results. Now, in museums, things are a little bit different. Evaluation occurs as, I'm going to say this a lot, because this is kind of like, I'm trying to stress the point of like, this is what we're doing it for, but we're analyzing the effectiveness of programs, exhibitions, and the museum as a whole. So it can either be as microscopic as we're going with one interactive, we're doing the effectiveness of it, or it can analyze the effectiveness of the museum as a whole. I've looked back through some of our survey results, and we have done a couple museum-wide surveys and polls. So those are very interesting to look at. Every museum does it differently. So it's always interesting when you look at a project, how small does it go, how wide does it go, and how wide it can apply to the project. When conducting evaluation, there is a lot more to consider when you're working in a museum. For instance, you have to balance the operation of the museum. Is it going to be during working hours? Is it going to be when the public is there? Do you have to worry about security? These kind of things are something you have to consider. You have to worry about collections care. If you're going to be evaluating around objects, how are you keeping these objects safe? That's always a big concern, especially when you're doing something like tracking or eye tracking. You don't want people to purposely interact with something they're not supposed to. And also guest rights. People don't often think about this, but you actually have a lot of rights when you enter a space like this. There's things that you can and cannot ask, things like that. So there's always a lot to balance when you're designing an evaluation. So anytime either staff or people think about these things as you're working on an evaluation. It's also important to consider your mission and values and funding opportunities. Like, you do not want a survey to contradict your mission and values. So whenever you're building something, a survey, a mission, anything like that, always go back, look at your mission statement and values, making sure you're supporting the museum as a whole. And then why do we do it? As mentioned, we do it to improve. We want to continually be better and serve our community better. So we do it to improve. It also gives us data and materials to use for grants and funding. Museums do not get any money from the government most of the time unless you apply for a grant. So evaluations often give you something direct to show. It's even a trend in recent years that many grants will require data from evaluations. So that's a big reason that a lot of museums do evaluation, and also to justify programming and exhibition choices. Sometimes something will be a little against the grain of what the museum usually does, trying something new. Whenever you're trying something new, it's great to have data to be like, look, our guests loved it. We should continue to do this new experimental thing. And also to ensure we're serving the community as we intend. This is one of the main goals of this evaluation we'll be doing is, are we serving the low vision community as we sought out to do with this interactive? So surveys and like evaluations can be a big part of that, is like getting feedback directly from your community instead of just assuming that your community is being served. All right, for our staff members, this is kind of review, but for our volunteers, this is the important stuff. We will have two evaluations. We'll have the general public evaluation, which is going to be a survey. This will take part during, if you want to take pictures, feel free. It's going to take place in May and June during peak visitation. We want to get as many people doing the survey as possible, so we're going to be doing it when we're primarily busy. You all will be trained further in now to proctor the survey, interact with guests, answer questions, and record important response data. And I'll get into what that means a little bit later. But that'll be your main duties for this evaluation project. The survey will be answered on an iPad. We have a couple that the education project has, not the education project, education department, sorry. And they'll be placed in a stand. So you won't be holding the iPad for the survey. You'll just be directing people to the stand. We find this kind of effective because it leaves you open to record some important things and interact with guests. I can't tell you how many times I've been doing an evaluation, talking to someone, and a guest will come in, interrupt, and be like, excuse me, where's the bathroom? Happens all the time. So it's always good to have hands-free away from the survey so that people can focus on that. Participants will also be compensated for their time. They'll get either a postcard or bookmark, depending on the store supplies, for free. You'll be surprised how much this incentivizes people to do a survey. People love a free postcard. And then the data will be analyzed using the Google Forms software with additional statistics done by me. The other project is going to be a focus group. This is going to be a lot more intense build up and preparation, but it's actually going to be a very short process. This will take place in the month of April when the museum is closed to allow participants privacy and minimal distractions.
So this is before.
Yes.
The others.
We decided to do it in April when the museum was closed on Mondays, since we will be closed starting in May, to give them that privacy. That way they won't have to come in early into the day, like at 9 o'clock to do it, and it'll give us plenty of time and space. We plan to have 5 to 10 participants based on interest. We'll be recruiting from the nonprofit listserv and some other means. I've reached out to the Wyoming Council of the Blind to try and get some feedback from them and maybe get some people. I haven't heard back, but it also didn't seem like a super active email I emailed. So we'll hopefully hear from them in a little bit. Volunteers for this will be trained with note-taking. Basically, we need someone while we're getting responses to take some diligent notes. I'll teach you how to do that. Focus group sessions, though, will be led by a museum educator. So either Jane or I will be the ones asking the questions with the person. This way, someone's focused on the questions and someone's focused on the note-taking. They'll be compensated with a gift basket, which includes a gift sponsored from the shop, and there's eventually going to be another sponsor. I'm still working on this. And the data will be quantified and analyzed by me. So this is the part where we're talking about some of the skills you're going to need to have. So we're going to talk about how to randomize. Why do you randomize your study? We randomize a study to try and reduce bias. Now you're thinking bias, I'm not biased. And actually, we're all biased creatures. That's how humans were created. We have very quick pathways to think in a quick judgment. This was because most of the time we were running from prey. We couldn't quite get rid of that instinct. So most of the time when you have something happen to you, your first thought is your bias thought, and there's nothing wrong with that. Bias will always be part of what we do, but we try and reduce it as close to zero as possible by randomizing the sample. A sample is evaluation term for the population you are choosing to study. In our case, it's people who enter the museum or the low vision community. For the survey, the sample would be anyone who enters the museum. That's all of our sample. And then for the focus group, that's the low vision community of Teton Valley. We are trying to recruit a sample from them in order to get better results. How do you randomize? It's mainly an exercise in counting as precisely as you are able to. When randomizing for a survey, you count the groups as a whole. So even though most of the time you count by person, in order to ensure that there's no less confusion and it's a little easier on the person proctoring the survey, just doing a group, even if it's a big family of like 6 or 7, that's one group, that's one participant. Because despite what you might try, people will give their opinions to the one person giving the survey. So consider one group, one response, one participant, and that's how you count them. So one group at a time is how you count. And only one person needs to fill out the survey. You'll get that many people be like, oh, well, do you need me? And like, no, we're good. All we need is the one group, one person doing it. You also count depending on how busy the museum is. It'll either be 2, 3, or 4. 2 is for slow days, so every other person. 3 for slightly busy days. You know, that just gives it a little bit more randomization. And then 4 for busy days. Now, this is kind of based on my personal experience doing evaluation in museums. It'll be easier once I kind of see how busy we get in May to give you a little bit more exact feedback on what I think of a slow day, a slightly busy day, and a busy day are. But also, as people who have been in the museum before, you're free to use your judgment. That's the biggest part of this, is you are smart, capable people who volunteer at our museum. I trust you.
So Sage, what that would look like would be like you as if you're the evaluator or whoever is, they'd be by the chief interactive.
Yes.
And they'd be watching those glass doors and they'd be counting people coming through those glass doors.
It wouldn't be people counting through people interacting with chief, because we're specifically asking for like people who touch chief. Yeah, it's because if you ask someone, hey, can you give me feedback on this interactive, and they haven't interacted with it yet, they will become biased with how they interact with it. They feel like they have to be more intellectual interacting with a chief touchable thing. So it's mainly you're counting the people who step away from chief, which is something we have to talk with curatorial about like how to properly set up a stand near close to the interactive so the volunteers can count them properly, but also not too far away that the person's like, what do you mean? What are you talking to me about?
So it's people who actually walk up to the interactive and read, touch, interact in some way.
Yes, that is the preferred way. That way we're getting feedback directly on that, and it's not somebody who's been asked to do it. We'll talk about that in a second.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's a good question. When you start a survey, do not start counting until you're done with your current survey. So that's something that I found tripped me up sometimes, is I would try and count as I'm doing it, and then the numbers get way off. So just wait until you're completely done with the person doing it and you start over. So the way that would look is, say I'm the evaluator. I asked Lucretia to do the survey. She's doing her survey, but 4 or 5 people come by. Those are not the people I'm counting. I start over, say when Lucretia leaves, Kindle comes up, that's 1, 2, I would ask Jane next. That's how you would count for a 2.
And maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but we're doing it on an iPad.
Yes.
So we're going to give someone with potentially low vision an iPad.
So that's part of the part where you're like only asked able adults. Sometimes you will have someone who's low vision interacting. If they're with someone, you could be like, can you please help the person give some feedback to the survey? So we'll go into a little bit more detail in a little bit about like reaching out to somebody with that. But basically you're asking only able-bodied adults. You're not allowed to ask someone who's under 18, no matter how much they try and justify it. They're not a legal adult, so you're not allowed to interview them without consent, and we do not have consent forms, and it adds another layer of complicatedness So for instance, if a kid interacts with it, you try and ask an adult to give the feedback with the kid's opinions, but the adult is filling out the survey. So if
You
someone,
just give them the iPad,
it'll
you
be
don't ask them the questions on the iPad.
no, the iPad will be on a stand near you, so you'll kind of stand here. The stand maybe is like right here, and you're like, hey, can you give me some feedback? And they'll fill it out there. Yeah.
And they fill it
So
out.
we do ask the people who come in, we tag one and say,
Yes.
would you be willing to take this survey?
Yes,
Or-
and we'll go into that at the end. We have I've practiced an example speech, but that's kind of how it works. And
Could
then,
I ask one more clarifying question?
yes,
So, okay, so you wait till they've done interacting and then you ask them, right?
yes.
Not
Well,
before they interact.
yes,
with
not
something.
before, because even though we would probably get more results that way, it's once you ask someone, hey, can you interact with this interactive? We instantly start thinking about satisfaction. Even if we're not directly thinking about it, people think, oh, I want to make this person who's asking me to do the survey happy. I want to give them the answers they want. So they will try and interact with the interactive in a certain way and then give you answers that they think you want. It's a big problem. That's probably like the bias part. That's why we'll go over in a little bit, like some skills to have. You do not accept offers to do the survey. If someone offers, that's an inherently biased answer. So
What do you say?
you say, thank you so much. We really appreciate you offering to do this survey, but we are attempting to randomize this study and you are currently not the person in, we'll talk about it a little bit, but yes, that's kind of what you say. Like, thank you so much. Like, this is not how we're conducting the survey. Well, I have a speech. Evaluation skills to have. This is where we kind of get into it. Good service is good surveying. Most of the skills you have as a docent or gallery guide already help you with surveys, which is, being open, being ready to answer questions, that kind of stuff. So most of the things you already do are very helpful. Some specific things for surveys that I think you guys should know is remain neutral. Try not to give opinions about the interactions with a museum while you're taking the survey.
Isn't this great?
Yeah. Like, don't try and hype up the interactive. We want honest opinions. So even if someone prompts you to try and give opinions, you try and redirect as best you can. That's a big thing. I can't tell you how many times people were very angry. They decided to do the survey I was doing, and then they were trying to get me to talk bad about the museum I was with. And I was like, I simply work here, man. Like, sometimes that is the best answer. Is like, I am a volunteer. I'm simply trying to complete this project with the museum. We appreciate your opinions. So trying to just remain as neutral as possible is always key. This is also going to be a little hard, I feel like, for some of our docents, but it's okay. Try to avoid chatting with the guests while they're directly doing the survey. If they engage first, it's fine, but it's best to give them time and space to complete the survey. Chatting can often distract them. I've purposely set up the survey in a way to do checks and balances to make sure that they're actually reading the survey. So try your best either to chat before or chat after, but not during. This is something we'll talk about a little bit, but if you're tracking behaviors, which is, we're going to talk about what that means, try not to stand out. Try and act like you are a guest who is just sitting. If a guest approaches you about, hey, what are you doing? You just answer honestly. You're like, I'm tracking behaviors for a survey.
So would you wear your name tag or not wear your name
Not
tag?
wear your name tag.
Okay.
That was the only time we're going to ask you not to wear name tags, when you're tracking behaviors. If someone does it and then they're like, oh, well, I'll be an example for you. Again, that's the same as do not accept someone's offer to be in the survey. Politely inform them how randomization works. We're trying to reduce bias by doing a randomization of our sample, and you are currently not the person I am looking to do the survey with. But thank you for your time. Like, just try and be as polite as possible.
Okay, and I've seen this happen a number of times. Somebody walks up to the platform and they push a button and jump backwards and talks to them. And they're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry.
Yes.
So they're not actually wanting to interact with it. They were just curious.
Yes.
But
that is still a valid experience for the survey.
Okay.
So please do ask them if they do the jump back thing. Because even if they weren't intending for it to make noise, they were trying to interact with it. And that's what we're looking for.
I know this is complicated, I mean, I know it's simple, but it sounds very complicated.
Yes, it kind of always sounds complicated, but then once you get, we're gonna do some practice sessions. That's gonna be another training session later where it's like, I basically will pretend to be a guest and I'll put you through some situations to kind of get you in the, because truly evaluation seems scary before you do it. But once you get into a groove and like you get used to saying a little speech and like answering questions, it's really quite easy. Because really all you're doing is asking people to participate, writing down some data, and then you're good to go.
Well, it's the behavior thing that gets me.
Yeah, we're gonna go over that. It's not
Okay.
done yet. We're not there yet.
And one other question, just, and you don't have to answer this before, maybe when we do the training, but typically it's on a tour that somebody will press the button and jump back.
Yes.
So if they don't wanna drop the tour and they don't wanna spend time
Yes.
doing that, just so that,
Yeah,
down
no,
the
and
road
that's a
we
good
have an
question.
idea.
I think I'm going to make it a rule that if they're on a tour, do not ask them because you do not want to take them away from the tour. It's maybe a thing where if you can remember them and they happen to come back through the gallery and do it again, you can maybe do it depending on where you are counting wise, but just as a rule, no.
okay.
It'll just be easier that way. Tracking behaviors. So basically the second part of the survey is people have a hard time remembering things, and that's completely okay, but we can try our best to remember for them. And so during each survey session, we will aim to have 2 volunteers, someone who is proctoring the survey and somebody who is tracking the person who's interacting. So that's going to be a bit of a, we're going to practice. Don't worry. Don't worry. I see some panic in the eyes. Basically the person who is proctoring will turn to the person who's tracking, let them know I'm going to ask this person who's currently interacting. And then you will do this. You will track time spent at the interactive. We'll give you a stopwatch, you record. It's basically showing how long our group spends at the interactive. Easy number. The use of buttons. You'll record if they use buttons and how many they interact with. And that's going to be kind of a guess because depending on the angle of whatever we figure out, you might not be able to see the buttons perfectly. So try your best. You will do it if they use the audio. Do they use English or Spanish or both? And then touch versus listen. Do they primarily touch the interactive or they primarily listen to the interactive? And we'll go over, like I said, this is just the first general training. We'll be doing practice sessions a little bit closer to it. So do not panic. We will practice. Trust me, I'm not going to throw you in. That's what happened to me. And then this is collecting demographic data. So this is the other thing that I am asking the proctors to do. This is what you'll do while the person is taking the survey. And it's not demographic the way you think. This is something called catch rate. I found it really tests like how effective your evaluation methods are. And this is basically the rate of how often people say yes. Because you will have a lot of people say no. People don't want to always participate in surveys, especially if they think it's going to bog down their trip. So the catch rate indicates how receptive your sample is to a survey. Some, like in DC, people did not want to do surveys, primarily because they were tourists and they thought they didn't have time. So our catch rate was around 60 to 70 on a good day. But when I was in Arkansas at Crystal Bridges, our catch rate was 95%. Because we were the only major art museum in the area, and typically there wasn't a lot to do else with your day, so people had a lot of time, and we had a higher catch rate. So this kind of is just testing how receptive are people when they come to the museum to do surveys, and it helps us, plan future evaluations. Basically, while you're conducting a survey, you'll record the number of people who you have asked. So that can be like 15 to 16 people that you've in total asked per day. You'll write down if they said yes, and you'll write down if they said no. And if possible, give a reason for the rejection in a notes section. Some people will be like, oh, well, I have a doctor's appointment, or I just don't have time today. We're on a tight schedule. If you can just write that down in a quick jotted note, that helps.
And will you give us a form for recording that as
There'll
well?
be a form. So that's why there'll be an iPad in the stand, and you'll have your own iPad, or I might even do a physical paper one for people who might feel uncomfortable running the iPad. And it'll
So
just
the
basically
proctor
be
does all this, not the person.
not the person. The person tracking the behaviors is tracking time, buttons, English and Spanish, and things like that. The proctor is doing the catch rate, which is how often you are rejected, basically. Any questions about that?
I don't wanna think of it as being rejected.
This is true. As someone who's a little rejection sensitive, I had to accept the word because that was the thing I really struggled with when I first started surveys on the field, is like, these people are not personally saying no to you, they're saying no to the experience. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, so for the people who are remote, we're gonna be doing a little bit of evaluation practice. It's not as practical for the people who are remote, so I'll quickly go over a practice speech so you guys can at least see it, but feel free to kind of just practice saying it. I find just having it memorized and, you know, ready to go is the best way to do it. So this is an example. This is what I always say. It's like, hello, the museum is conducting a study on our touchable interactives. Would you have a few minutes to give us your thoughts? You want to keep it as short as possible with giving them the information. Sometimes there'll be follow-up questions and then you give the answer accordingly. And then you say, if they say yes, thank you so much. It's just a quick survey on the iPad here. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, is the iPad the interactive?
No, it's where the survey is gonna be. It's gonna be on that iPad and the stand.
Okay.
The
So
interactive's
it will
the
be
chief.
next to or near. the
Yes.
Interactive.
Mhm.
Oh, it's not the iPad.
No, the
It's-
interactive is not it's the chief interactive.
What I explained.
You know, the chief in the gallery, how it has that touchable.
Oh, for
3D.
yeah, oh, for
Yes.
chief.
Okay.
Yes, we're evaluating that. And
I'm
so,
thinking you're saying chief is the person.
no. But this is kind of an example speech, but you're free to say whatever is most comfortable for you. I always say find whatever rhythm you have and then go with that, because truly you want to be as most comfortable approaching people as you are. Stumbling over your words doesn't help. Trust me, I've learned. So
Okay.
just having a little practice speech is always good.
So all of this is about the chief interactive.
Yes, we're going to be evaluating the Georgia
Duh.
O'Keeffe.
Do you see
And
the
the
light
chief-
bulb?
Maybe it's
Should've
gonna make
started
more
with that.
sense.
I mean, I'm totally in another world
I'm
here.
so sorry. Yeah, this is what a practice will look like for our remote people. We're gonna try and get some people to practice their own little speech. But thank you so much for participating. If you have things you need to do, feel free to step away at this point. We're just gonna be practicing.
So is this the proctor saying that or the
Yes,
other person?
the proctor. So it'll kind of be like this, proctor here, tracking, like if I imagine the chief angles right, it's hard. There he goes. Chief will probably be on, when you're facing chief, the right side of chief. That's probably the safest place with the art. I think I might have to talk to curatorial about it. It's like we have to find an angle where the person can watch the interactive, and then maybe near the children's gallery, the person who's tracking the time and everything can also see things. So that's gonna be, we're gonna have to figure out angles, but that'll be what the practice sessions are for, is introducing to you where everything's going to occur and doing both parts of the survey.
Will people look to the survey on their own, I'm thinking? You know what I mean? If the iPad is out there and
It's not gonna be left out there. It's gonna be a thing where if a survey person is out there, they have it with them. And then they take it away when they're done with their session.
So is the
Oh,
reason
yes.
that the surveyor doesn't write down the answers is because that they could skew them? Is that the thought?
Yes, we tend to find when people ask the questions personally, that's when it's a bit more about people pleasing. Cause you know, you have to directly tell someone, but if it's kind of like, you know, when you're in school and they put up that screen around, you know, so you didn't cheat off of people. The iPad and the stand kind of gives the impression of you are allowed to give your own honest answers on that. And that's kind of what we're looking for. That's what the focus group, you know, you don't get personable interaction with the survey, but you get the personal interaction with the focus group. That's why we're kind of doing both, is to cover both sides of the evaluation spectrum.
So you're saying the surveyor is gonna have the iPad with them?
On a stand, not like holding it.
That's why I'm wondering if people can't, still there'll be a time when they're not right at the stand, right?
Well, that's,
So they're gonna walk up and
yeah, that's
have
what the
the
proctor is
opportunity.
part of their job is gonna be, is like to
chase people
monitor,
away.
not chase people away, but like to monitor. So people will come up and you'll be like, hi, how can I help you? And then you can just talk to them. That's like one of the situations we'll go over. Cause there's a lot of like just different scenarios that commonly happen when you're doing an evaluation survey. So we'll kind of just like run through those during the practice sessions, like
a picture, don't touch that.
Yeah, it's not a don't touch that, it's like you just
Leave a
be
survey alone.
friend, you do
Walk
friendly
away.
approach, like, hi, can I help you? And then they're like, well, what's this about? And then you can tell them like, oh, we're doing an evaluation of our 3D interactive over there. We're asking people to randomly do the survey who interact with the interactive. Like, just, it's always about giving information and being as friendly as possible.
It's gonna be such a magnet for every kid who walks in.
Oh yeah, and that's just part of the thing is like that's why I say docents and gallery guides who have been trained to do that, your skills are gonna be great to do that because you're used to having to say, hey kids, don't touch the art and things like that. You are kind of already built to handle things in a gallery.
So this is mainly to practice is gonna be on Monday, but are we going to have that going on when the museum is open the rest of
Yes,
the week?
the focus group is happening when it's closed, so we can give them privacy to answer the questions and give thoughtful responses. Surveys will only happen during operating hours.
Okay.
Yeah, so
And only when there's a person
at
out
the
there.
survey, yes. We won't leave it to its own devices, because then you can get some really,
So we will know in advance if we're going to do a survey.
yes, it's kind of gonna be like, it's not gonna be labeled docent tour. I'm gonna create an assignment in BigNet and I'll show you what it looks like. But it'll basically be like an assigned time. We'll be doing variable times to try and catch things. So like instance, in May, once we're open 7 days a week, we'll probably do a Monday morning session, a Wednesday afternoon session, Friday morning session. Like we'll do 4 or so sessions a week, alternating the time. And of course, not all those sessions may be filled, and that's completely fine. You know, we will do it based on who's available and what we can do. That's why it's from May to June, is to try and give us as much opportunities to catch as much data as possible.
Oh, everything is clear now.
And that's why we're doing this, so we can answer
I
any
anticipate
questions.
too much.
No, and it's okay because this truly is a lot of information, but that's
It
why
is.
we're recording it. You can look back at it later, review it as much as you need. And I'm always here if anything comes up, if you have any questions. I will try and always be at the museum if we're doing surveys, in case anything comes up. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, I assume, so like the incentive, the gift shop.
Yes.
You say that at the end, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So that'll be something like you'll be carrying with you. I have to look at I've been told we have an iPad stand. I'm gonna see how it operates because many museums have like a custom built stand where you have like a little cache to hide the postcards, but we don't have one. I'll figure out a different system. But basically you'll have them, and once they're done, you're like, thank you so much for your time. Here's a, postcard to thank you for your time. Please let us know if there's anything else we can do. Like, you just gotta be super over polite. Yeah, and I have postcards already in my office. We already have like 100 or so. So we're good for postcards for a little bit.
Yeah, how many people are you aiming for in all this?
Ideal would be 100 responses, but that's shooting for the sky. Probably more accurate 50 if we get some really good results. Because sometimes you like I said, I can show you guys the survey because I've already had the draft built out, but the way it's set up is to check to see if people are reading. So like the answers are switched around. They're not always in ascending and descending order. Sometimes the answers are flipped, and that is a way to catch if people read. Because it'll say not likely to likely on one side and then likely to not likely on the other. And it's just a way to see and double check that people are reading the survey. And if a sample like seems questionable, like they didn't answer all the questions or something else, you have justification to be like, okay, this response is actively like not a true response. So stuff like that.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
So it seems like when you're out there by chief, out in the galleries, there's actually 2 surveys happening simultaneously. The person who's just watching and recording and the visitor who's working on the iPad. Is that correct? You're gathering 2 sets of information?
It's kind of like the general survey has 2 parts to it. You have the survey and then you have someone tracking the behavior to try and match them because you want to make sure things go together. So the forms should be the same number when you look at them. So you can pull the forms together and look at everything as a
So like
whole.
they both might be looking at a question, how many buttons did you
Well,
activate?
the tracking behavior is kind of like you're trying to be sneaky. Like, I'm thinking the cheetah chairs that are kind of near this vanishing, the volunteer could sit there because people kind of don't immediately look behind them. And so they might be from there able to watch people do the interactive. And then the survey person can be from the other side. So it's kind of just the tracking person doesn't talk to people. And some people might like that. But you do record data and you are participating in the project. And then the proctor talks to a lot of people. Gotta be friendly, gotta be willing to interact with people.
So when you sign up, you're either signing up to be the proctor, the one who talks and explains, or you're signing up to be, is it called recorder?
Yeah, or tracker. I'll put tracker, maybe.
Okay.
Because I only have so many words in VicNet, so.
Tracker fits with the museum.
Yeah, tracker does fit with the museum. The vibes are there. Yeah.
How many hours or timing wise for these shifts?
Timing wise, I'll probably discuss that with the VLC, but it could be just 1 hour or 2 hours, nothing more than that. Probably ideally an hour, I think. Yeah, because typically evaluations can be anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on the person, but that's like usually one person doing a survey, standing by themselves doing it. I think if we're having a two-pronged approach, we can get away with an hour or 2 hours. We'll see. I'll discuss that with the VLC, feel how they feel comfortable wise doing that long.
Okay, so they're busy on the interactive and then they do the survey.
Yes.
Okay.
And the tracker does not interact. They're meant to be in the background. I'm glad we could do this. A lot of good questions.
Okay, one more question.
You're allowed, Jane,
So
as many
the
questions as you want.
So the tracker, is do the trackers itemize things they're looking for match the things on the iPad?
No, so the iPad's it's gonna be like this. If done correctly, like when you do the Google form, you have the responses and they give you a number for the response, like form such and such number. The form for the survey should match the form that the tracker fills out.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
Yes, so it's like the survey person will let the tracker know, hey, I'm gonna ask this next person. They will track the behaviors and then the survey person will ask them. I have to work it out a little bit still because I'm not used to doing the tracking separately, but I know that's something that the education department asked for is to like, hey, can we actually get recordings of the behaviors? And I'm like, yeah, we can try. So we're gonna just do our best to match them. And it's also something where the person can take a note, like the tracker can take a note about like something about the person so that the survey matches.
So at some point, will you be putting the two side by side?
Yes, that's the
compare?
goal.
Okay.
Is because it'll be kind of like, how accurate to their results were they, or like their guesses about themselves.
Okay, and this is probably gonna jump ahead until we do the training. But you have the proctor here and then you have the trainer over there and the person's probably in the middle. And so the proctor just asks the person if they'd like to do the survey. They say yes. So they're staring at the iPad. They're not taking it off the stand. It's on the iPad. And so the trainer,
The tracker.
is looking at that person. And so I don't know what the questions will be, but first is, did you enjoy this?
Mm-hmm.
And the tracker is looking over, and if they smile, do you write down smiled?
No, we'll
you
go
go-
over that in detail.
Scowl. They
Scowl.
I mean,
Real
but
quick.
I'm fine with everything until somehow the two surveys have to
Yeah,
match, and
hold on.
I'm lost on that.
I
Don't
part.
think you can't picture it until you have those.
Yeah, hold
Right.
on.
Yeah.
Don't look at my calendar too much, guys.
I also have a question about that because if we're waiting for the people, they have to interact with the piece
Yeah,
before being asked to survey.
yeah,
Then
that's
how do
where
we
it gets
know?
complicated,
Yeah.
and that's where I'm still working out
Okay.
the nuts and bolts a little
Yeah.
bit. But I'm pretty sure even if they say no to the survey, technically their results are still good, so we
Okay.
could still use them, but we want to
For the
match them as-
tracking data.
Yes,
Okay.
for the timing and things.
Okay.
But the But the tracker is not asking is not keeping records of like, what is your age? The tracker is just tracking those things that we talked about.
Yeah.
The time spent at the interactive,
Mhm.
if they're using the buttons or not. So they're not saying necessarily, the surveys aren't matching in the sense that both people are asking the same questions or getting the same
They're
data.
just matching the same content.
Person.
The
Oh.
person.
The person.
Yes.
Because the
See,
tracker
this is,
is
see,
tracking.
this is why I'm glad we're doing this, cause to me, like,
Okay.
everything makes sense in my mind from having
Okay,
done this so
right.
much, but like, you know, for people who've done it the first time, I'm like,
So
yeah,
it's
oh
not
yeah,
like- It's not like the tracker is like they spent 2 minutes here and you have, how many minutes did you
Yeah.
spend?
I was gonna
Oh,
pull up, this is a survey, this is the current draft where we say, the survey asks you for give feedback on either Chief or The Antelope by Georgia O'Keeffe, respective touchable interactives. We want your honest feedback on your experiences using it. If you have any questions, this is something you always have to include. You have to give a contact when you're doing surveys as part of the guest rights. They have a right to complain directly to the person in charge. So this is what the survey, the proctor will be doing. What is your age? And this is kind of the breakdown. And then you have, what is your gender identity?
But wait a minute, the proctor's not doing it, they just.
No, this
author
is
it.
just what, yes, the proctor's the one who's
standing by.
handling this survey.
Just, and both the tracker
No,
and the proctor are quiet
yes.
once they start the survey.
Yeah, once they start the survey, you don't interact. It's like, which did you use more during the interactive? Audio buttons, tactile image, I used both equally. Did the tactile image enhance your experience? Very helpful, not at all. Did the audio narration enhance your experience? Not at all, very helpful. That's one of those trick questions where it's like, you check and see if people were reading. Which language did you use? English, Spanish, I used both. How many audio buttons did you use? I wasn't sure about the button numbers, but I think I got them right. And then which audio narration did you enjoy the most? So these are different things.
Just so you know, Sage's way more than 6.
Yeah, that's what I think. So this is why it's a draft. It's like, I'm still
Right.
figuring out, because I think we talked about Georgia O'Keeffe having less
Yeah.
buttons.
Probably,
So-
that one will have fewer, yes.
Yeah, so it might be a thing where we go with the fewer button total.
So is that gonna be up when we do this?
It would, that's the idea.
That's the
Yes.
hope.
They're working on building the Georgia O'Keeffe one right now, and it's
Right.
supposed to be done
Yeah.
by May, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna need 4 volunteers.
But we're not gonna do it like the same. So like one day will be Chief, one day will be Georgia O'Keeffe. They're
Oh.
not all gonna be done at the same time. Cause that would be confusing
Because then we
and
need
also
4 people at
bias.
once, which is hard, would be hard to achieve.
Also bias, because someone who does the Chief one will come on later to
Oh.
Georgia O'Keeffe and then it's like, oh, I'm doing it again. Yeah,
right.
but you're not.
I'm good at this, I'm gonna do
Yeah,
it.
do it again. Here's another question though, which audio narration did you enjoy most? Did you feel the interactive helped you learn? Would you like to see more interactives? And then comments and questions, and then these are marketing questions. So marketing asked for a few questions to be brought in, and I had them. So yeah, we'll also be getting some good curatorial data because I put what brought you in, and I made sure to include every special exhibition to see if there's something one or another that people are interested in.
Great.
Yeah, that's what the survey looks like. So it's very short and sweet, won't take too long. Truly, ideally 5 minutes for every person you ask. So that's why 2 hours would be nice, because you have 5 minutes for each person, and then you may not always have a person waiting or like working with the interactive while you're doing the survey. So 2-hour sessions would be great, 1 hour, depending on what we think.
Sage, do you have an example or a draft of the trackers form?
Not yet,
Okay.
because that was kind of something we brought up recently, and I was like, ooh.
I wanna know how, if you don't say anything, and if the person who's doing the interactive doesn't say anything but fills out the survey over here, how can you track their behavior? I mean, they can come in and just be very silent.
Because it's mainly things that you can observe. Like the time, you can time that. You can start it when they,
Frustration,
we won't be doing emotions. It's mainly just like, one of the things that Jane and Patrice brought up is like, how are people using the interactive? And that's what all the observations from the PowerPoint are meant to bring up. So time tells you how invested is someone in the piece. Buttons, are they really invested in learning
that's the
everything?
behavior.
That's the
Okay.
tracking behaviors.
Okay.
You won't hear anything. You don't want to get like personal feelings
I just
involved
have
with the
that.
tracking.
Are they
That's why I was confused.
Are they really frustrated? Yeah, no. When you're tracking behavior, that's like my old psychology days coming through. behaviors aren't what people think they are, like your emotions and how you feel. Behaviors are
Body
like
language.
things you do as a person at any point. Like me gesturing when I talk, that's a behavior. And that's something
So
that someone
something
can
that's
observe.
easily observed.
Yes,
So body language.
body language,
You're just gonna
basically.
observe
Yeah.
their body language.
I realize that's an error on my part. Tracking behavior for me is like, yes, psychology, I know what we're doing, but that's one of those old habits, die hard situations. Behaviors aren't really feelings, they're just trackable movements that you do.
Okay.
Okay, so when you do the tracking part, you'll give us questions and then we'll answer those questions.
Yeah, it'll be very
Just be-
similar to what you see here, where it's like bop, 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 like, oh, fine, like, see how we have this question? How many audio buttons did you use? How many audio buttons did the participant use? And you click the answer that's most accurate. And then you'll have a blank
And they'll
answer
say
to insert
5
the
to
time.
6 and you'll write down 1.
Yes.
Okay,
Gotcha.
I got it.
So
Yeah.
this is the trackers.
No, this is not trackers, this is the proctors. So the person who's asking, hey, do you have a few minutes at the museum? We'd like to get your opinion on this.
This is the
Interactive.
one on the stand.
Yes, on the
The
stand.
iPad on the stand.
Mhm.
And we don't have a sample of the trackers for it.
Yeah,
good.
it was one of those things we brought up in an education department meeting, and I was like, oh, yes, we need to do that. So,
Well, this is complicated, and you've done a good job answering all of our questions.
yes.
And this is, for those of you who have been around, we've done a variety of visitor surveys, but this is probably the most thorough to date, because
Which
it
is so
involves a focus group and it involves 2 prongs to this in-gallery piece.
Mhm.
So we're excited.
Yeah, and at any point,
see what
if you
we-
have any questions or if anything comes up, or if you feel like, hey, I think this part could be better, just let me know. Like I said, I'm a very, I've done evaluation 3 or 4 years now, including psychology evaluation, so I'm kind of ingrained in my ways of like, oh yeah, I'm used to people around me also knowing what's going on, so at any point something doesn't make sense, or you have an issue or something, just let me know. You just gotta remind me.
Well, now we know what's going on.
Yeah, that's what the whole point of this was. So for our volunteers, especially if like when you've already signed up for the focus group training, the focus group training is gonna be giving, we're gonna go over an example of what a focus group looks like. We're hopefully gonna have focus group questions ready so you can be prepared to what they look like. And we'll go over your responsibility as note takers. What does it look like? What are you going to be aiming to do? Things like that, because we're gonna have hopefully 2 to 3 volunteers per focus group session. This is to try and, again, reduce bias. And it's not like me doing like you guys are mean people writing down mean things. It's me going, people will write down different things because you associate with different things and you think differently than maybe like Lynn and Lucretia, you might think differently. And so you might write down different things. So it just covers our bases. We're getting as much information as possible from as many sources as possible. So that's what the focus group training will be on the 24th. So next week, we don't have Monday musings, as a reminder, because it's President's Day. And then the week after that, we're gonna have the focus group training.
So the folk, are they gonna be?
Yeah, don't come to work that day.
Don't come to work on Monday. We're not gonna be here.
Will there be
There's
2
a
or 3
museum
people
called-
there at
It's
the
a Monday.
survey?
It's
as well?
open.
Oh, that's
Oh,
right.
No,
There will be
so
some
for the
staff here, like
survey
security
sessions,
staff will be here.
there'll be 2 volunteers, a tracker and a proctor. For the focus group session, we'll have 2 to 3 note takers,
Okay,
and that will be reflected on ThickNet.
okay.
And that can be staff and volunteers if you're note takers or no.
Primarily volunteers.
Okay.
I mean, if staff do wanna help, that'd be great, but primarily focusing on volunteers.
So am I correct in thinking the feedback at the focus group will be people who are blind or visually impaired?
Yes.
And the people we're evaluating in museum will be mostly average people who have sight.
Yes, it's kind of, that most interactives that aim to increase accessibility in a museum actually benefit the public as a whole.
Right.
They don't just benefit the group that they're aimed to help. So
Right.
the focus group is focused on primarily getting feedback from the group that we created the interactive to help people who are blind and low
Right.
vision truly experience art in a unique way and get unique information. but people in the
We all
public
know
also
everybody
use
touches
it.
it.
Yeah,
Yes.
so, those are two
So it's
different
valuable
groups.
to see what they think of it.
Yeah, because there might be people in the low vision community who say, actually, I didn't enjoy this. This was not something I wanted to do, and there's only one, they might have strong opinions about it. So that's the reason you do both groups.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Is the survey the same form for the focus group?
No,
as-
the focus
yes.
group's gonna have a bit more in-depth questions because focus groups tend to be
Yeah.
more train of thought
Mhm.
process, where it's like you do not have to answer every single question. You try to, but also you want them to give their authentic and honest thoughts and to speak to each other and be like, well, I thought this, well, I actually think this. And you're just trying to get as much of that thought process in notes as possible.
So you'll record it, most likely.
That's something we have to talk about ethically.
Yeah.
Ethically, if you record someone like that, it's a little gray area. It's something you have to get like consent forms for, and I can't remember properly. You might have to include HIPAA, not HIPAA. There's a different one. HIPAA's the medical one. Because privacy laws, there are privacy laws that protect people. If you record them like that, they are protected. But if you just take notes, it doesn't apply. So it's one of those legal things
But
where I'm
so
like,
you can't, we would not be able to record on tape.
we would
Or
if we
digital.
got consent, and there's another factor.
If there's a consent.
Yeah,
But we're just taking notes.
if you take notes and you compensate them, then
Okay.
you get
We'll have
less
lots,
law.
I take that back, we will have many note takers.
Yeah, that's why we have 2 or 3 note takers, is to try and capture as much as
Okay.
possible. Cause sometimes people are like, oh, recording's easier. I'm like, okay, you have to get the privacy laws involved, you have to get the consent laws involved, and then you sometimes, again, I'm blanking on the name. There's a,
Yeah, it's
the
also-
government's a little wishy-washy right now, but there's a government agency you have to contact and get like say, I am doing a evaluation with people. I'm including people in something. It's because psychologists were out of control in the 80s. That's the reason you can't even record people. You ever heard of the Stanford prison experiments? If not, go check them out. That's the reason we can't do that. So
Well, if you've ever watched Law and Order, if they're gonna record an interview, they always come in and tell the people.
yeah, it's
that
one of
they
those
have to
things.
Put it down.
Yeah, and it gets even more complicated than Law and Order. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I hope this was very helpful. And
Excuse me.
you're fine. And then on the 24th, we'll do focus group training, and then after that, I will schedule practice sessions. For the focus group, the practice sessions will probably be in March, and for the surveys, they'll probably be in April.
So are we not having musings at all this month?
We had it last Monday,
Yeah, okay.
and then the 17th, we can't do it because closed.
President's
And then
Day.
we're out of Mondays, and then it's March.
But you said something like, then we're gonna have another training.
Yeah, on the 24th, next week when we would normally have musings, we're closed, don't come. But after that next week on the 24th, we will have focus group training, because
Okay.
that's a Monday.
That wouldn't have been a musing.
That wouldn't have been a musings. I
Okay.
specifically moved it around the musings,
I might not be able to be here on Monday. Will you record it or,
just like we're doing it now.
okay, so that I can review it?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Sounds good.
Sage.
No, thank you guys.
Thank you for
Nice
making my
one.
day so
Oh,
confused.
On